Thank you very much. And I'm only going to look at, I have a couple staff people here, but Lindsay, I don't have my cell phone, so I will not know if votes occur. So I don't want to get in trouble with the leadership. So if something happens, you got to, yes, okay. Sorry about that. You know how it works here in Washington. You think you have a schedule when you start the day, then by the minute you show up, the day has totally changed. And votes, especially around the DOD budget, we have several, to say the least, amendments that are floating and being debated right now. You know, I have to say this, and I say this with just a little humor, but also the changing dynamics of the political landscape of this country in a lot of ways. As you know, and I'll talk, a few things I'll talk about here, not only missile defense, but strategic importance of Alaska, and also some of my work with regards to the Armed Services Committee, and again, the issues around military support and military defense of our country. But I know, you know, as I sit now as a Democrat from Alaska, we were just talking about some interesting statistics on the Armed Services Committee. It's the first time anyone from Alaska has been on that committee since 1968, to give you a little perspective. Also, it's the first time a Democrat in the federal legislative body has been here since 1980. So it's a very interesting time. In Alaska is a very different state. I was born and raised there, and I know in my own caucus, first they wonder why I'm here today talking to your group. I have to be frank with you. They wondered, are you sure you got the right building and group? And I said, absolutely. But so do several other Democrats who were actually very supportive of me coming over. But I'm a Democrat that has a little different view, and if you watch the last 6 months, one thing I've noticed about the last 6 months is we have had a lot of votes on a variety of issues. And I come to the Senate with a pro-defense, pro-gun, pro-development, pro-personal privacy viewpoint. Alaskans are very libertarian in that area of privacy. We're very strong in defense. We just had a vote, matter of fact, on the Thune Amendment, which was about concealed carry laws for guns. And it was interesting because when it first came out, his original bill, probably 2-3 months ago, I was presiding. It's the service you have to do as a new member, so I was presiding, but listening to him talk about this new piece of legislation, and I thought, well, I like that. And I don't know what the protocols are, and I hope I never learn all that, because it's better to be naive and ask for forgiveness later. And so as he was finishing, I turned to one of the pages, and keep in mind I was presiding during this time. I said, have him come up here. And you know, the pages just do whatever a senator says, which I've quickly learned that, which is very dangerous, you know, because they don't say, well, sir, no, you can't do that. They say, yep, off they go. So he came up, and I said, I want to co-sponsor that legislation. And this week, when he was preparing to present it, he says, and I have a bipartisan support on this legislation. It was like 22 Republicans and me. And so I felt I was carrying an incredible load on my back and on my shoulders, but I felt good. But we just took the vote. It failed by just one vote. He had to get 60 or 2 votes in. I think he got 58 in the final call, which I forget the exact amount of Democrats, but there was about 15. And a lot of them are freshmen. A lot of them are new Democrats. And we come from a different perspective. So in a lot of ways, it's not surprising to my Alaskan voters that I would be here today. But also, as a good politician, I never turn down any group to speak in front of, as I have done in Alaska. I mean, I don't care if it's the Alaska Independence Party who wants to, you know, secede from the United States, to the Alaska Center for the Environment, to Gay Pride, you name it, I go. Because what people get from me is pretty straight talk, and I like to hear what people's views are. It helps me develop who I am as a person. Today, as I mentioned, I want to discuss national defense issues from a perspective you may not have heard from often. That's what I call the northern perspective. Those of us from Alaska truly view things a little differently, and what we call the outsiders, the 48 states below us. And I hope I can give you a perspective. Our international orientation, especially as mayor, and you noted that as mayor, it's the largest city in Alaska. It's actually 43% of the state's population. In Alaska politics, the governor is the first and most powerful position, and honestly, the mayor of Anchorage is. And the reason for that is, one, we have incredible powers as the mayor of Anchorage. It's the strongest, one of the strongest form of government in the country. Line item veto. I get to veto amendments to ordinances right on the floor, which is unheard of power. I appoint boards and commissions, railroad or airport, all of them. But on top of that, we're an international city. We can touch within 9 hours from Alaska 90% of the industrialized world by air. We do business with Japan, Korea, China, Russia. Probably every 4 or 5 weeks, I would do interviews with international press corps that would come to Anchorage and talk about the strategic importance of Alaska and specifically Anchorage. And just to give you one other data point, Anchorage is the second or third, it goes back and forth, largest cargo hauler in the world. We move more cargo than almost everywhere else except a couple cities in this world. So if you're shipping anything west of the Mississippi internationally, more than likely it's coming through Anchorage, Alaska. UPS as well as FedEx's international headquarters are in our city. Now I say that because also from a military perspective, they understand that strategic importance. And when you think back to when Alaska was set up and originally purchased in '67, the U.S. Army helped administer it, and then the next group, about 10 years later, was the Navy and the U.S. Revenue Service. Always, you know, that was always the next one to come in right behind. But which later the Navy, the portions that we had, we ended up having the Coast Guard as one of our biggest components. And as time progressed and the gold rush occurred and Alaska continued to move forward, and then of course we saw, and it was Billy Mitchell, General Billy Mitchell, that understood the air strategic location of Alaska, which you got to take yourself back to then 1935, you know, when air was just becoming part of the equation and more aggressively part of the equation. And in his famous quote was, "Alaska is the most strategic place in the world from a military standpoint." As I said, that earlier number where you can touch within 9 hours 90% of the industrialized world by air is an important strategic commerce issue, but also military issue. Sure enough, as you can imagine, when World War II and the buildup, Alaska's vital role in the nation's defense grew dramatically. The Alaska Highway was constructed by the military and military equipment. And I don't know if anyone's ever subjected yourself to driving the Alaska Highway. Let me ask that question. You know what I'm talking about? Was it a short time ago or a long time ago?
94.
That was a little while ago. It was good then, but it was, you can only imagine prior to that. This was a road that the military constructed in record time. The idea was to move goods into Alaska for a strategic location. It was built, again, by the Army, by the military. Also, we had a unique group of individuals. They were Alaska natives, First People, Eskimos, Alaska Territorial Guard, which were really our eyes and ears on the shores of Alaska for the United States. Very important group. There's not many left now. Matter of fact, I'm battling right now in the DOD budget to get a little clause taken care of. These are individuals, there's about 26 of them. They served this country for more than 20 years, and the Army will not pay them a pension, but they get VA benefits. It's a small group that is 86 years old. They actually paid them for a short period of time, and then they cut them off. And then they told me they might have to repay it. And I was like, what are you talking about? These individuals served our country. They were on the front lines. They volunteered to serve, and then they continued to serve in the military and other capacities for another 20-plus years. So we are aggressively working that. We'll see how that all plays out. Alaska, again, as we move into where we are today, as I mentioned, is very vital. We have 30,000 active duty members from all branches, from all our bases, from Elmendorf, Eielson, Clear Air Force Base, and as well as Fort Richardson, Wainwright, and Greely, which are our Army bases. These bases are home to the latest and greatest military equipment. The big debate yesterday, F-22s. We have F-22s. We have a whole complement of them, and we're very proud of the fact we have them. We also have the C-17s, which if you've ever been in one of those, it's an amazing, I got a, you know, they said, as mayor, you know, they offer kind of trips off and on because of our relationship with the military, and said, oh, by the way, would you be willing to get on a C-17? I'm thinking, I know it's better than C-130, so that's, I'm all for it. But they didn't tell me exactly how it landed. And if you're not familiar with the C-17, it's a fast, short drop. And it's not a, it's a like this, bam, short. I fly in a lot of planes, I got to tell you, but that was, I wasn't warned exactly what it was going to be like, but an incredible aircraft, one that is making a big difference all over the place. We also have a Stryker Brigade, an Army's model deployable brigade combat team today, despite the counterinsurgency, which is critical, which already has seen, our Stryker Brigade has seen activity in Iraq, as well as another Alaska Airborne Brigade combat team has recently been deployed to Afghanistan. And I'm sure you've seen the recent accounts of PFC Bergdahl, who is from Fort Ridge, and actually from originally Idaho, but stationed in Fort Ridge. Alaska also is the home to 75,000 veterans, the highest per capita in the nation, 11% of our population. And why I want to give you this background so you see the backdrop of what I deal with as a person who sits on the Armed Services Committee and involved heavily in the issues that surround the military in Alaska, but also our country. Recently, 5 of us just came back from Afghanistan and Pakistan. It was led by Tom Carper, but 4 new members. One was a past House member, Mark Udall, who's now Senator, Kay Hagan, Jean Shaheen, went on this trip along with myself to really understand what's going on in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And we got there just as things started to move, actually. We left one of the cities in about 24, 48 hours. I can't remember, I don't know where Jim is, but he remembers the trip with me. But it was bombed that next day or so. And so we were there in probably the heightened area. But it was important to understand because I wanted to know what makes sense, what do we need to do, especially as we deal with so many impacts to our troops. Alaska has nearly 10,000 troops deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq. When you think of our state, a lot of people say, well, it's just a small state up north. But when you think of the volume, we're the 6th among all states and territories in volume of personnel serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. The trip was an eye-opener, to be very frank with you. It gave me a sense of where we need to be and how the counterinsurgency is working, but also spending time in Pakistan was very important because we were there right when the shift was starting to occur, where the military in Pakistan was finally realizing they have to move their forces over to the border with Afghanistan and make some impact. Otherwise, they're going to be overrun. And so for us, it's important. For this world, I think it's important, especially we want a stable government in Pakistan. We want to make sure that the Taliban does not take control of their government in any form or any way. And watching that transition, literally, we were there right when this was all starting to move and shift. So when you talk about being at the right time at the right place, this may have been yes on one day, but no on the next, because you weren't sure what was going to happen next. But I also, as we finished there, it also, during that time, North Greely was getting active. So as we were traveling and then starting to get reports prior and as we went on regards to North Korea and what's going on there, as you know, in Fort Greely, we're very fortunate to have the ground missile defense system. Greely currently has capacity for 26 missile interceptors, maintained by the members of the Alaska National Guard. The interceptors can be launched to intercept an incoming enemy missile. Now, it's hard to describe this to people who are not aware of it. Many of you are probably already aware, but I mean, it's a bullet hitting a bullet. I mean, that's the technology that's there. It's incredible technology that has developed over the last several years for sure, and some of the early arguments early on was it doesn't work. Well, that's why you're testing it. I mean, I could never understand that argument when they said, well, you know, as soon as you got up and running, they say, well, it doesn't work. Well, no, you're testing it, you're improving it, you're advancing the technology. If you ask the military today, as we have done in Armed Services Committee, and you ask the question about missile defense system overall, it's a 90% accuracy. That's not too bad. And it's because of robust testing and the issues that the military has been honing in on involving better technology. Now, as you know, the President had proposed cuts to not only the ground-based, but also some other programs within the missile defense system. The budget that's in front of us today has, and I'll describe this in a second, on the ground missile defense system, the continuation to a certain extent of that program. It still has the termination of the multi-kill vehicle as well as the airborne laser tail number 2. This is mainly because in the eyes of both the committee as well as the individuals that were developing the systems, we were at an experimental phase and we were jumping to production, and they want to continue to focus on the experimental stage, which seems rational. But saying that, we have to be very careful that people don't just throw out the whole missile defense system because they think that that's old technology and that's not where we are today. That's an incorrect view. I know from our end of it, the GMD system, as you know, is in Alaska and California, and it's supported by an array of radars deployed all around this world. And it's only operational, an American-based defense system to protect our nation. It's the only operational missile defense system. The decision to reduce the total number of deployed operational interceptors from 44 to 30 was the President's proposal. The investment strategy may have changed, but the threat clearly hasn't. And just to give you a perspective, and this to me, when we said this at the committee, I even had to say it a couple times to remind myself the quantity of missile testing that North Korea has done since this proposal, this budget proposal was presented by the administration. North Korea has launched 16 ballistic missiles and conducted one underground, as well as a multi-stage long range. The latest launch on July 4th means that 70% of the tests, missiles that they have done since 1998 have occurred since April of this year. 70%. So budget proposed, more testing from the North Korean community. I don't know, maybe it's a coincidence, but I'm not sure I like that coincidence because as they do these tests, they're perfecting their technology, but they're also showing their wares. Part of it is a two-part. One is, first, they want to improve their technology. Second is they want other countries to see what they have because they're in the business of selling too. That's what they do. That's part of their hard cash economy. And so we have to keep that all in perspective. It's not just about North Korea and what they might do. It's what North Korea will do or what they and who they will sell it to. And so we have to keep that all in perspective. Fort Greely is, again, some of you may or may not know, in Alaska, is the home of the most of all of our ground-based mid-course defense interceptors. Alaska soon will be the home of the sea-based X-band radar, which is currently going through some testing and will be located in ADAC. And I have to say, for the crew that's part of that, the testing's done in Hawaii. Then they're going to be going to ADAC. I love Alaska, but Hawaii to ADAC is an incredible experience, I have to tell you. It will be one that the folks who have to deal with that facility will remember. But along with that, the Kodiak launch facility, this is in Kodiak, Alaska, is important because it's also a launch facility for testing and test missiles to replicate enemy threats and launches. This is in Alaska. The good news is, on this front, Secretary Gates made it very clear that he wants robust testing. And again, we're very supportive of that. We think that's important. If you don't have robust testing, you cannot perfect the technology. And I think that is, we see as very important. Now, just to give you a little more technical, and then I'll move on, and then I'll open for questions, if that's okay. And that is, in the weeks since the announcement to reduce the number of Alaska-based interceptors by the administration, the Missile Defense Agency has had to do some fast analysis. Part of the problem is deteriorating conditions of what's called Missile Field 1. In Alaska, you have Missile Field 1, then you have completed Missile Field 3, I don't understand this, and 2 that we're now doing. So somehow they skipped 2, went to 3. Well, what they quickly found as we were going through this discussion in our committee was Missile Field 1, which contained 6, was originally 6 silos for the interceptors, was designed to be a test pad, basically a test facility, and was put together very quickly. Because of that, it has leaking antifreeze, has mold contamination, outdated copper pipes and are freezing and thawing, and a variety of other things, which, as you can imagine, for a missile, is not a good silo to have. So we learned this through the discussion of the committee, which was not public until we brought it out. And what we found was, even under the robust plan as they claimed they had, the administration, what was about to happen was they were going to have less capacity because the first 6, in the sense of the silos, were inadequate and are becoming and deteriorating. So it was important for us to make that point. And also, what the plan was the Missile Field 2 up there is to stop the production. In other words, just stop the construction, close it down, seal it up, move on. Well, the problem with that is, if you want about, we debate a lot, it seems, in the Senate about cost overruns, expensive things we're doing. Well, why would you take all the work that's being done there, shift it out of there, all the people doing the work and all the equipment, and then, oh, by the way, now we got to replace the 6 that are deteriorating, so let's bring them all back and do the next 6 or 7. So what we argued for in committee, and were successful in Missile Field 2, was to make sure the next 7 silos, there's 14 left, the next 7 to be constructed, to be finished. So as they figure out how to decommission the first 6, there's 7 silos to move forward, and not to do anything with the remaining 7 silos that are not fully completed until they finish their long-term planning in regards to the defense review as well as the ballistic missile defense review. Because our view was, why would you make a decision when you don't have a plan yet of what you want to do with ballistic missile defense systems? So the argument was received in a positive way from the committee. I won't give you all the gory details as we talked about just before he came here, but let's just say it worked, and they were unanimous in the final outcome. Also, we made sure to ensure that Congress has all the information available at the time of the budget submission in the future, which is critical because we did not have it this time. And I know how the system works. I used to be a manager as a mayor, and you know, when you control the information, you deliver as you see fit. In this situation, we've made it very clear in Section 243 of the Defense Authorizing Bill to provide future year defense plans on an annually that provides a schedule and plans for testing, sustainment, and development and employment of GMD. So we're not working in this very narrow, because what we were working in when we were doing this budget was a 2010 kind of budget only, in 2011 or 2010 budget. Well, with missile defense, it's a long-term view you have to have. So you have to see the whole picture. And we were only being delivered this short-term picture. And that's when we started asking questions about 2011, 2012, 2013, that's when we started to learn about the first one, and that was Field 1, and what was happening with that, and no plan yet to deal with that, so we had to help develop it through the process. So this will make it clear that they have to, they must work through this process with us, and so is the long term. And let me just end on one last piece, and that's on a whole separate subject, but is related to national defense. And that's the whole energy picture that we face in this country. You know, the whole issue of energy independence is critical for us to have more flexibility in our national defense strategies and our world strategies when it comes to dealing with international affairs. And what I'm finding, again, as a Democrat in the caucus, you know, oil and gas issues are not necessarily high on the list of a lot of folks in the Democrat caucus. Now, I say that in 6 months ago. Today, it's a little different. And why I say that is we have more senators, Democrats, coming from western states now. Montana, Dakotas, Colorado, New Mexico, Alaska, as I call the Rocky Mountain western states. And why is that important? Because we're states that understand natural resource development. We understand oil and gas. We understand mineral development. It's all part of what we do in our states and part of our economy. So we bring a different voice to the table that hasn't been there in a long time. So we bring it from an economic standpoint, but we also bring it from a national defense standpoint, how important it is to be energy independent as far and as much as we can. The issues around oil and gas will continue to be, as we move to an energy bill for this country, will be aggressively fought. But I do believe that folks like myself and others, Mary Landrieu has really carried the water in the Democratic caucus on oil and gas issues, but now, as I call it, she has reinforcements. The new folks are here, and we're laying out what we think are important. The energy bill, as well as the climate change bill, will be an important two pieces of legislation as we move forward in the next 4 or 5 months. And I think what you'll see is a more moderate wing of the Democratic Party within the caucus laying out our positions of how these industries need to be part of the equation. Again, that's a little different, and I think it's going to be exciting. And as I said, on the energy is one piece, but the climate change is another. And this will be, you know, depending on who you talk to on the House side, climate change energy is all one. On the Senate, we like to see them separated. We'll see how that all plays out as time goes on, but I can tell you from Alaska's perspective, we are ground zero. Anyone who wants to talk about climate change, I can spend hours on that. But I also understand the importance of industry, because we see the balance of how you bring oil and gas industry in, balance against the environment, at the same time recognizing how we have to deal with climate change. And we can argue all we want about what causes it. The fact is something's happening, and it's in our best interest to do something about it from an economic standpoint, but also from an energy long-term standpoint, because what you don't ever want to get into is a crisis moment. Because when crisis moments happen, I don't care if it's around energy, climate change, you pick the issue, the likelihood is you will have bad decisions come out of it because you're in a crisis. And so you're making decisions for the moment, not the long term. So it's in our best interest as a country to figure out how this climate change issue, how the energy policy, how we meld this package together the right way. As I've told my colleagues, if you can get Alaskans to agree to a climate change bill, the likelihood is it's probably going to be a good bill. because that means it's protected our industry, but also understood what you have to do to balance it out properly and what kind of investment you have to have. And as I like to brag always about Alaska, and I love sitting around with other senators when they talk about coal, because coal is always, coal state guys are, you know, they're adamant, they're militant on energy issues. And then I love to sit around with them and I say, oh yeah, that's great. If I combine all your coal of every state in this country, other than, you include Hawaii, everybody, we exceed the amount of coal deposits in the country in Alaska. We have half plus the coal deposits to this country. So we understand non-renewable and renewable energy, but we also understand the impacts of climate change. So it's going to be exciting time. I'm excited to be here in Washington, D.C. Some days I wonder if it's been only 6 months or 6 years already, because the pressure points are pretty high around here, but it's a very exciting time and very challenging time. Let me end there and just say thank you all very much. I'm happy to answer questions. Please.